everyone, and welcome back. I'm the Well-Dressed Wrencher. Today's video is going to be a bit different than what you're used to seeing. What I'm about to show you is pretty personal and somewhat heartbreaking for me to do. As you can tell, this appears to be what's left of a Subaru BRZ. But this isn't just any BRZ, this was my BRZ. A car with a story as unique as its build. I bought the car a few years back as nothing but a shell with no motor. But instead of putting a stock FA 4-cylinder back in the car, I decided to spice things up a bit. So, let me show you what I did to it. Underneath all this wreckage lies a 6-liter all-aluminum LS2 from a Corvette. This was my first LS swap, and let me tell you, it was a labor of love. I finished it last September, and I had big plans to showcase it in a review and a cost breakdown video for the YouTube world. But, as you can see, life had other plans for it. It's still a bit surreal to me, given that the time of this video it happened only a few days ago. What I do feel, though, is incredibly blessed, lucky if you will, that nobody was hurt, including myself. This car was more than just metal and bolts. It represented my hard work, the satisfaction of creating something exceptional, and countless memories made with friends and family. It was even inspiring to some of those out there who saw it on the streets, which is something I'll always cherish. The original idea to do the build came to me a few years ago after I took a ride in my cousin's GT350 Mustang. I knew I wanted something with a V8, but didn't really want to spend the money on a Mustang or a Camaro. Around the same time, I also had a 1988 Mazda RX-7 Turbo, which, of course, in typical rotary fashion, had a blown engine. I had considered swapping that first until this fell into my lap. Then it seemed like the perfect candidate. Luckily, I do still have the RX-7, and it will be getting a rotary rebuild soon, so keep an eye out for the channel for that if you're into those. So, what's next? You might be wondering why I'm making this video. Well, even though the BRZ is a mess, it appears the engine and the transmission and most of the important parts have survived unscathed. So with my good friend Adam's help, who's around here somewhere, we're gonna salvage as much of this car as we can. You might even see this engine find its way into another car in the not so distant future. But first, I wanna talk a little bit about safety. I'm extremely grateful that no one was injured in this incident, myself included. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of building or modifying a car, but it's crucial that safety always comes first, even if it's something as simple as getting out checking your lights or your tire pressures before a drive. As you can see, this is the aftermath of what was a significant accident. It's a stark reminder of how quickly things can go wrong, and I want to emphasize just how critical it is to prioritize safety in every aspect of automotive work and driving. With that being said, let's get to work on this car and start pulling this engine. First things first, I need to get the car jacked up and secured on jack stands. Safety first, right? The first order of business is to drain the coolant and engine oil, but I'll need to get this skid plate out of the way for better access, which was easier said than done. It was pretty twisted and a lot of the bolts were hard to access, but with a little bit of a fight, I finally got it off.
Why are we wearing dark glasses?
That's all I can find. Fun something, dude.
Okay. I think I'm ass.
Whoa, we're not draining coolant, folks. The oil was drained and looking clean, no signs of debris or metal flakes, which is a good thing. I didn't drain the transmission fluid at this time because I knew the TR6060 was sealed and it wouldn't leak. Continuing underneath, I removed the custom downpipes I made for easier access to the engine mounts. While I was down there, I also figured it was a good idea to remove the entire exhaust system. And if the exhaust doesn't look too great, that's because it was my first time welding and my first time building an exhaust. And honestly, it didn't come out too bad in my opinion. And here are those beautiful custom downpipes I made. I had to heat wrap them because this BRZ wasn't made to have such a big engine in it, so heat soak coming through the firewall and transmission tunnel was a big problem. Something I'll have to plan to do better on the next build, maybe some hood vents or some stick-on thermal insulation. Back up top, it was time to get the bumper removed. But since I'm pulling the engine and the transmission together, I'll need to take out the radiator and everything else up front here to give me the space I need. With this bumper out of the way, I could then get the upper radiator support off. The intake, which was tucked and routed to the front of the rad for cold air, was removed next. And with the bumper beam out of the way, I could finally pull this radiator out as well. Now I'm going to tackle the exhaust manifolds, but first I need to pull the plugs and plug wires. Then, with those out of the way, I can tackle the engine mount on this side. The mounts I used for this swap are from CX Racing. I'm not sponsored, but I like this kit because it gives me the ability to move the engine forward or backward before finally deciding on the best location to mount it. Some of the other kits out there are a fixed mount, and they don't really give you a lot of space or room to move the engine around. Plus, I didn't have to do any welding or cutting, the mounts simply bolted into the stock subframe. On the other side, I started by removing the catch can and heater core hoses, giving me better access to the plugs, wires, and the exhaust manifold. With the exhaust manifolds out, I began removing all the engine wiring. Luckily, none of this was damaged, because thanks to Haltech, this is a pretty high quality harness. To simplify things on the install, I incorporated some of the Haltech outputs directly into the BRZ's factory locations. The starter, alternator, and fans are all spliced in for a cleaner and more efficient setup, but now it all has to come back out. I wanted to get this intake off as well, mainly so I had a good point to lift the engine from, but also, as you can see, a large part of the intake was actually damaged. This is a big concern at this point because that means the broken piece of the intake or any other debris like rocks could have gotten to the engine and caused some irreversible damage. Adam stepped in here to help me remove some of the fuel lines. Starting in the car, I removed the center console so that I could easily access the shifter and shifter plate that holds the whole mechanism up inside the trans tunnel. Custom shifter plate here didn't look so hot, but it did a good job at sealing the cabin from any exhaust or heat that could have come through the trans tunnel. Back under the car, it was time to remove the transmission mounts and some of the wiring that went to the transmission. Thanks to the Haltech ECU, I had a speed sensor, reverse lockout, and transmission temperature sensor all wired up and working perfectly. Luckily, none of the sensors or wiring under here got damaged either. Next up, I'm going to remove the custom drive shaft, which also survived the crash. Transmission unbolted, drive shaft removed, and wiring set aside, it was finally time to pull the engine and transmission out. But first, let's take a quick break and check out that beautiful red beast some of you may have spotted behind me earlier. This is Adam and his father's 1965 Chevelle SS, an all numbers matching car with a built 383. It's been an ongoing project that Adam has been tasked with finishing, and as you can see, it has a lot more goodies than just what's under the hood. From all the bodywork and paint, he fitted tubular control arms, a disc brake conversion kit, plus much more, all while trying to keep the car relatively stock appearing. He also has a collection of the original interior and exterior parts that are to be refinished and installed. He's probably going to need a hand finishing and assembling this car, so if you guys want to see more of it, let me know in the comments. Now let's get back to the action. And of course, there's always one thing we forget to disconnect. In this case, it was just the clutch line. No worries, after a quick disconnect, the engine and transmission came out just like they should. Now it's time to separate the transmission from the engine so I could get the engine on the stand. I noticed a lot of battery acid was seeping into everything, so I took a moment off camera to neutralize and clean as much of it as I could. Once the engine was up, I removed the clutch and flywheel, which surprisingly looked brand new considering they've been through a hard few thousand miles.
Hey, all work, no pleasure. I ain't here to make friends, big stepper. Hey, bad guy, Heath Ledger. Ready for whatever, I'll be front and center. Don't fly too close to the sun, your body chopped up by propellers. Came in arrogant, but left out in a stretcher. The comparison, y'all know y'all couldn't.
One thing I noticed here that I didn't spot earlier is this valve cover is sitting crooked. Upon closer inspection, I found a bent bolt. That's probably due to the fact that the whole firewall and battery mount was pushed into the engine. Luckily it's minor and can be easily fixed with a new bolt and gasket in the future. Given the broken intake manifold, I figured it was wise to remove the heads and check for any damage like vent valves, head damage, or any issues with the pistons. These rockers near where the valve cover had shifted showed some signs of moisture and rust starting. Fortunately, they can be cleaned up and reused since, as you can see, they were an upgraded trunnion kit, which helped this thing hold the red line all day long.
However, whoever, raining from above, we shooting down through your umbrella, ayy. Getting fed up, nothing you could tell us. Snapping every shot I take, just wait till it develops. Stick around, let me hold it down, look at what we found. This a marathon, not a sprint, let's go 100 miles. On the ground, we to the clouds, never.
With the rockers and push rods out of the way, I started removing these ARP head bolts, which I can reuse in the future.
This a marathon, not a sprint, let's go 100 miles. On the ground, with me to the clouds, never coming down. That's the crown on me, wear proud. Up they was talking about. Stick around, let me hold it down, look at what we found. From the ground, with me to the clouds, never coming down.
With the head finally off, it was time to check for damage.
Look at what we found. Said this a marathon, not a sprint, let's go 100 miles. On the ground, with me to the clouds, never coming down.
This cylinder right here had the piece of plastic stuck in the valve, but thankfully all the pistons and cylinder walls look really good. Now let's check out this head. Inside one of the ports, we found the plastic piece. It turns out it wasn't actually jammed in the valve, so that's a relief. And as you can see, once I turned the head over, it fell right out. I'll quickly disassemble and remove the other head just to be sure there's no internal damage on this side as well. Luckily, everything here looks great too. This engine will be throwing down some new rubber in no time. Since the block is pretty dirty from debris and battery acid, I'm going to remove the front accessories to get everything cleaned up before it eventually goes back together. With the engine and transmission removed and checked over, it's time to salvage some of the parts from the rest of the chassis. Starting with the interior, the seats weren't damaged and only one airbag deployed. If needed, I can reuse these in the future or maybe even turn them into some cool office furniture. And there was a lot of glass in the car, so you see me using the vacuum quite a few times to avoid any nasty cuts or getting glass in places where it shouldn't be. Back seat, I removed the Haltech wiring that ran the fuel pump. Since I spliced it into the factory BRZ wiring, it was simple to cut and remove the zip ties holding it all in place. With that wiring out of the way, I then took out the fuel pump and assembly because this was an aftermarket pump and technically could be good to reuse if I need to. Continuing with the wiring, I moved to the driver's side to remove the throttle pedal wiring and the other wiring for the Haltech gauge. Unfortunately, I did such a good job tucking away all the wiring, it made it pretty tricky to pull out. On the passenger side, there was even more wiring to tackle, starting with the grounds for the ECU and some more wiring integrated into the chassis, like the CAN bus wires. also took the time to remove the wideband controller and the wiring associated with that. This part was somewhat challenging since the lower dash was pushed in, making it tough to pull a lot of the connectors through. Yet again, I'm thankful that none of this wiring was damaged, so that I get to reuse it all. Finally, with Adam's help, it was time to remove the engine harness. We carefully pulled, pushed, prodded, and poked all the wiring through the hole that had been drilled, ensuring not to tear or damage any of the wiring or connectors. Now we can see this fantastic wiring harness in all its glory. Haltech makes a solid kit, and I'm thrilled that none of it was damaged, so I can reuse it for the next build. A lot of the dash accessories were unharmed, so I moved on to take those out next. With the steering wheel and gauge cluster removed, I focused on the head unit and climate controls. I thought it was wise to save the combination switches too. We quickly got the dash out, and you can really see how much of the impact the firewall took. Since the rear diff and subframe weren't damaged, I decided to salvage those. To make my life easier, I dropped the whole subframe, which meant undoing a few things like strut mounts and brake lines. I stepped on the brake a few times to quickly get any of the old brake fluid out so it wasn't dripping all over the floor. Then I started unbolting the main bolts for the subframe. I thought it would be a smart move to remove the bumper for easy access when pulling the whole assembly out. Plus, it wasn't damaged, so that'll go in the save file. As you can see, it was a lot of work just removing all these parts. If you're interested in watching them go back into another shell in the future, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And of course, I forgot the ABS sensor wires. After removing those, I could finally lower and slide out the subframe and diff. And, to my surprise, it already had upgraded bushings in it. Last but not least, I quickly removed the Wilwood clutch master and custom recessed mount that was specifically made for this car so that it didn't hit on the head of the LS engine. So that's it for today's video. It's a bittersweet and a farewell to a great car, but I wanted you all to know what happened and what's in store for this powerful LS motor. And before I go, I just wanted to discuss safety a bit more. It's imperative that in any car you drive regularly on the road, that you have it professionally inspected to ensure it is safe for the road. Because when you get behind the wheel of a car, you're not only in control of your own life, but countless others around you. One of my biggest takeaways from this incident is the importance of adjusting to match road conditions. Whether it's slick roads, unexpected obstacles, or just poor visibility. Always drive with caution and adapt to your surroundings. I hope you guys can learn a thing or two from my misfortune and help keep yourself and others safer behind the wheel. Let me know in the comments what you guys think and if you have any questions. Or share your car stories that are similar to this. Don't forget to subscribe and follow along as we embark on a new journey. I'm the Well-Dressed Wrencher. Stay safe, work hard, and let's keep our automotive passions alive and well. See you guys next time.
It didn't. And you got fuel in your mouth?
First time I've ever tasted fuel. I don't want more. Burning my mouth, dude.
Did you swallow any?
No.